An avoidant doesn't become attached because you love harder, wait longer, or explain yourself better. They attach when love stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like safety. The moment you stop organizing your emotional world around their availability and start standing firmly in your own life, something shifts. Avoidants don't fall for intensity, they fall for calm strength. For someone who chooses them without needing them, who offers warmth without chasing, consistency without control. When you stop demanding closeness and instead allow it, intimacy becomes a choice rather than a trap. You respond instead of react, you keep your standards high, you don't punish distance, but you also don't reward emotional unavailability. And that's the paradox. The less you try to secure them, the safer they feel attaching to you. Because now you're not a demand, you're a refuge. And when an avoidant chooses you freely, not out of fear but desire, that attachment runs deep, grounded, loyal, and unforgettable. When you understand that avoidance attached to safety rather than pressure, everything about how you show up in connection changes. Pressure is not always loud or obvious, most of the time it's subtle. It lives in the energy behind your words, the emotional urgency in your questions, the unspoken expectation that closeness must happen now or mean something immediately. An avoidant feels this before you ever say it out loud. Their nervous system is trained to scan for anything that threatens autonomy, and pressure, especially emotional pressure, registers as danger. Safety, on the other hand, feels spacious. It feels like being allowed to come closer without losing oneself. When you bring calm instead of urgency, you communicate something powerful. You are free here, and I am whole regardless. That message disarms the instinct to pull away. Safety is created when your emotional state is stable, not dependent on their responsiveness. If they take longer to reply, safety looks like you continuing your day instead of spiraling. If they need space, safety looks like you respecting it without coldness or punishment. This doesn't mean suppressing your needs, it means expressing them without emotional volatility or fear. Avoidants are not scared of needs, they are scared of the emotional chaos they believe needs will create. When you show that you can name what you want without collapsing if you don't immediately get it, you become someone their system can relax around. Pressure also shows up when someone tries to fast-track intimacy. Deep conversations, constant reassurance, future-focused questions, or repeated attempts to define the relationship can feel overwhelming, not because the avoidant lacks feelings, but because closeness has historically come with loss of freedom or emotional overload. Safety means letting intimacy build organically. You allow connection to deepen through shared experiences, consistency, and mutual curiosity rather than through interrogation or emotional intensity. When closeness unfolds naturally, the avoidant doesn't feel trapped by it, they feel drawn to it. Emotional calm is one of the most underestimated forms of attraction. When you don't overreact, over-explain, or over-pursue, you become emotionally predictable in the best way. Predictability here doesn't mean boring, it means steady. Your moods don't swing wildly based on their behavior. Your self-worth doesn't rise and fall based on their attention. This steadiness sends a clear signal connection with you won't cost them their nervous system. Over time, that calm becomes addictive because it contrasts sharply with the internal tension many avoidants live with. Safety is also built through boundaries. Counterintuitively, having standards and limits reduces pressure. When you know what you will and won't accept, you don't need to push, convince, or chase. You don't linger in confusion or tolerate availability while silently hoping it will change. You calmly choose what aligns with you. This removes the unspoken expectation that they must regulate your emotions or meet you to feel okay. An avoidant relaxes when they sense they are with someone who can walk away from misalignment without drama, guilt, or emotional collapse. The more you embody safety, the more an avoidant's defenses soften. They begin to associate closeness with relief rather than responsibility. They notice that being with you doesn't require performance, emotional labor, or constant reassurance. There is room to breathe, to miss you, to choose you. And choice is everything to an avoidant. When attachment forms in an environment free of pressure, it doesn't feel like surrendering freedom. It feels like gaining a place where they can finally rest. Being chosen rather than needed is one of the most magnetic dynamics in any relationship, especially with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. Need carries weight. It carries expectation, responsibility, and the unspoken fear that if they pull back, someone else will fall apart. Choice, on the other hand, feels light. It feels clean. It says, I want you here, but I am still standing if you're not. That distinction is everything. An avoidant doesn't run from love. They run from the feeling that someone's emotional stability is now their job. The moment they sense that they are required for your happiness, their system starts preparing an exit. When you need someone, your life subtly shrinks around them. Your mood shifts with their attention. Your confidence rises and falls based on how close they feel that day. Even if you never say it out loud, the energy communicates dependence. An avoidant feels this as pressure, because need implies obligation. It implies that staying is no longer a desire, but a duty. Being chosen is different. Choice comes from fullness. It comes from a life that is already rich, already moving, already meaningful. When someone chooses from that place, it feels like an honor, not a burden. Being chosen means you don't put someone at the center of your emotional universe before they've earned that place. You don't rush to prioritize them over your values, your routines, or your sense of self. You allow the connection to grow alongside your life, not replace it. This creates attraction because it signals abundance. You are not auditioning for love. You are offering a seat at a table that already exists. Avoidants are drawn to this because it removes the fear that intimacy will erase individuality. Need also tends to blur boundaries. When someone is needed, they are often tolerated even when they show up inconsistently or give very little. The unspoken hope is that if you give enough, stay patient enough, or love hard enough, they will eventually choose you. Ironically, this dynamic makes choosing you less likely. When you are willing to accept crumbs, there is no urgency to offer more. Being chosen requires discernment. It means you notice effort, you respond to consistency. You don't overinvest in potential while ignoring reality. This clarity is grounding for an avoidant because it shows you are emotionally self-led. There is also something deeply regulating about being with someone who wants you but doesn't collapse without you. It allows an avoidant to approach at their own pace without fear of being engulfed. They can come closer because closeness doesn't mean losing themselves or being responsible for someone else's emotional well-being. When you are chosen, you are invited in freely. When you are needed, you are held tightly. One feels expansive, the other feels suffocating. Choosing someone also means you are capable of choosing yourself. You speak your needs without desperation. You express disappointment without drama. You can say, "This doesn't work for me," without using it as a threat or a plea. That emotional independence creates trust. An avoidant begins to feel that connection with you is based on mutual desire rather than fear of abandonment. Over time, this safety allows attachment to form naturally, because staying becomes something they want to do, not something they feel trapped into doing. When someone realizes they are with a person who doesn't need them to survive, but still wants them deeply, something profound happens. The relationship stops feeling like a responsibility and starts feeling like a privilege. And that shift, from being needed to being chosen, is where real attachment is born. Consistency without chasing is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in attraction, especially with an avoidant. Many people think consistency means constant availability, frequent reassurance, or always being the one to initiate. In reality, that kind of behavior often feels like pursuit, and pursuit triggers distance. True consistency is quieter. It's about being emotionally steady, predictable in your values, and reliable in your presence without trying to pull someone closer before they're ready. An avoidant learns to trust not through intensity, but through repetition over time that doesn't come with pressure attached. When you chase, your behavior speeds up to manage anxiety. You follow silences with explanations, distance with more effort, uncertainty with more talking. Even when it's well-intentioned, it communicates urgency. Urgency makes an avoidant feel like something bad will happen if they don't respond correctly or quickly enough. Consistency, on the other hand, slows everything down. It says, "I will show up as myself today the same way I did yesterday, whether you lean in or not." That steadiness allows their nervous system to relax because there's nothing to manage or escape from. Consistency looks like responding warmly when they reach out, without over-rewarding it with excessive enthusiasm. It looks like being present when you're together, without using the moment to secure the future. It looks like following through on what you say, not as a performance, but as a baseline way of being. Over time, this creates trust because your behavior isn't reactive. You don't disappear to punish distance, and you don't overextend to prevent it. You remain grounded regardless of their fluctuations. Chasing often comes from a fear that if you don't do more, the connection will fade. Ironically, doing more too soon often causes exactly that. Avoidants need space to feel their own desire. When someone is always available, always initiating, always accommodating, there's no room for longing or choice. Consistency without chasing leaves room. It allows the avoidant to notice your absence when you're not there and your presence when you are. That contrast is what makes attachment possible. Trust builds when your emotional tone stays the same even when circumstances change. If they pull back slightly and you remain calm and self-directed, you communicate resilience. If they come closer and you don't suddenly grip tighter, you communicate safety. This emotional regulation is deeply reassuring to an avoidant because many have learned that closeness comes with volatility, expectations, or loss of control. When they experience connection with someone who doesn't escalate or collapse, it rewires their understanding of intimacy. Consistency is also about aligning words and actions. You don't promise more than you can sustain. You don't talk about depth you haven't built yet. You let your actions speak gradually. Avoidants are especially sensitive to inconsistency because it reinforces their belief that relationships are unstable. When your behavior matches over time, they begin to trust not just you, but the experience of being connected. What makes this so powerful is that consistency doesn't try to convince, it doesn't negotiate attraction, it doesn't prove worth, it simply exists. And because it exists without chasing, it invites curiosity. The avoidant starts to lean in not because they're being pulled, but because nothing is pushing them away. They begin to feel safe enough to invest because they know what they're stepping into. There's no emotional ambush waiting on the other side of closeness. Over time, this kind of presence becomes grounding. It stands out in a world where love often feels frantic or conditional. And that's when trust deepens. Not because you chased it into existence, but because you created an environment where it could grow on its own. Managing your standards instead of managing someone else's emotions is one of the most powerful shifts you can make in any relationship, especially with an avoidant. When you try to manage their emotions, you become hyper, focused on how they feel, how they might react, and what you need to do to keep them comfortable. You soften your truth, delay your needs, over-explain your intentions, and walk on eggshells to avoid triggering distance. This doesn't create closeness, it creates imbalance. An avoidant can feel when someone is bending themselves to maintain harmony, and that silent self-abandonment creates pressure they never asked for. Managing your standards is different. It means you are clear about what behavior you engage with and what you don't, without needing to control how the other person feels about it. You don't try to regulate their discomfort or rescue them from emotional consequences. If they pull away, you don't chase to soothe their fear. If they give mixed signals, you don't interrogate them to restore clarity. You observe, you decide, and you respond from self-respect. This immediately changes the dynamic because the emotional labor shifts back to where it belongs. Avoidants often grew up in environments where emotions felt overwhelming, unpredictable, or intrusive. As adults, they are extremely sensitive to anything that feels like emotional responsibility. When you try to manage their feelings by over-accommodating, reassuring excessively, or minimizing your own needs, you unintentionally reinforce their belief that closeness equals burden. Your standards remove that burden. They communicate, "I am responsible for myself, and you are responsible for you." That separation creates safety, not distance. Having standards doesn't mean being cold or rigid. It means being honest without drama. If something doesn't work for you, you say it calmly. If behavior repeats that doesn't align with your values, you don't lecture or threaten, you adjust your availability. This is powerful because it's grounded in action, not emotion. You're not trying to get a reaction, you're simply choosing what you participate in. An avoidant respects this far more than emotional appeals, because it feels clean and predictable. When you manage standards, you stop over-functioning. You don't anticipate their needs at the expense of your own. You don't fill in emotional gaps they haven't asked you to fill. You let silence be silence. You let distance reveal information. This requires trust in yourself. It also creates attraction because it signals inner authority. You are not trying to convince someone to treat you well. You assume that treatment is the baseline, and if it's not met, you don't negotiate your worth. There is also a deep nervous system effect here. When you stop managing someone else's emotions, your own system becomes calmer. You're no longer scanning for signs of withdrawal or approval. That calm presence is regulating to an avoidant. They sense that being with you doesn't require constant emotional management. There's no pressure to perform or reassure you. Ironically, this often makes them more willing to show up emotionally because they are no longer bracing for a reaction. Standards also protect you from staying in situations fueled by hope instead of reality. You don't cling to potential while ignoring patterns. You don't explain away inconsistency because you understand what you need to feel safe and fulfilled. This clarity is grounding. It tells the avoidant that connection with you is real, not chaotic or ambiguous. They know where they stand, and they know you won't disappear into resentment or over-giving. When someone realizes they are with a person who won't chase them, fix them, or manage their feelings but will absolutely walk away from misalignment without cruelty, something shifts. The dynamic becomes one of mutual responsibility. And that is where respect grows, not from being endlessly understanding, but from being deeply self-honoring. Closeness only becomes sustainable for an avoidant when it feels optional rather than demanded, because demand turns intimacy into an obligation instead of a desire. The moment closeness feels required, expected, or monitored, their nervous system interprets it as a loss of freedom. This doesn't mean they don't want connection, it means they need to arrive at it voluntarily. When someone expects emotional availability on a schedule, constant reassurance, or immediate depth, closeness stops feeling like something they're choosing and starts feeling like something they owe. That's when withdrawal happens, not as rejection, but as self-protection. Demand often hides behind reasonable, seeming behaviors. Wanting clarity, consistency, or reassurance isn't wrong, but when those needs are delivered with urgency or fear, they become pressure. An avoidant can sense when closeness is being used to regulate someone else's anxiety. Even subtle expectations like, "You should want to talk every day," or "If you cared, you'd open up more," create an invisible contract they never agreed to. Optional closeness removes the contract. It replaces expectation with invitation. And an invitation feels safe because it comes with the freedom to say yes or no without consequence. When closeness is optional, space is no longer a threat. Silence doesn't mean something is wrong. Distance doesn't trigger punishment, coldness, or emotional withdrawal on your end. You remain warm, grounded, and self-directed whether they lean in or pull back. This communicates emotional maturity. It tells them that intimacy with you doesn't come with traps, tests, or conditions. They are not being evaluated on how close they are, how often they show up, or how deeply they express themselves at any given moment. There is a powerful paradox here. The more freedom you allow around closeness, the more likely it is to grow. Avoidants need time to feel their own desire. When closeness is demanded, they move away from it to preserve autonomy. When it's optional, they have the space to notice that they actually want it. Desire can't exist under pressure, it needs room. Optional closeness gives that room without withdrawing care or presence. This doesn't mean you abandon your needs or tolerate emotional starvation. Making closeness optional is not the same as accepting breadcrumbs. The difference lies in how you respond. You don't force intimacy, but you also don't stay indefinitely in a dynamic that doesn't meet you. You observe patterns. You decide what works for you. If closeness never increases and that doesn't align with your needs, you don't argue for it, you choose accordingly. That choice is quiet, self-respecting, and deeply felt. Optional closeness also removes the power struggle that often exists with avoidance. When one person is pushing for more and the other is resisting, intimacy becomes a tug of war. When you stop pulling, the rope goes slack. There is no one to resist against. This often creates curiosity. The avoidant begins to approach not because they're being asked to, but because they feel the absence of pressure and the presence of genuine warmth. Emotionally, this dynamic is regulating. The avoidant starts to associate closeness with ease rather than obligation. They learn that being close doesn't mean losing control or being consumed. It means sharing space with someone who respects autonomy as much as connection. Over time, this experience can rewrite their internal narrative about relationships. Intimacy stops being something that happens to them and becomes something they participate in. When closeness is optional, every step toward you is meaningful because it's chosen. There is no resentment building beneath the surface, no sense of being cornered into emotional exposure. What grows instead is trust. Trust that connection with you will never cost them their freedom. And that trust is what allows closeness to deepen naturally, steadily, and authentically. The moment you stop trying to secure someone, something counterintuitive happens. They begin to feel secure with you. Securing someone often looks like constant checking, clarifying, reassuring, or future-proofing the relationship. It comes from fear. Fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear that if you don't hold on tightly enough, everything will slip away. An avoidant feels this immediately. To them, being secure is like being contained, monitored, or emotionally pinned down. The more you try to lock in certainty, the more their nervous system prepares to escape. When you release the need to secure, you shift from control to trust. You stop asking questions meant to stabilize your anxiety rather than build connection. You stop reading into every pause, every change in tone, every delay. Instead of trying to manage the outcome, you focus on how you show up in the present moment. This doesn't make you indifferent, it makes you grounded. And grounded energy is deeply stabilizing to someone who is used to emotional intensity turning into obligation. Avoidants don't feel safe when someone is afraid of losing them. That fear creates invisible pressure. It says, if I leave, something bad will happen. Even if you never verbalize it, the emotional weight is there. When you stop trying to secure someone, you remove that weight. You communicate without words. You are free to stay or go, and I will be okay either way. That freedom doesn't push them away, it relaxes them. It gives them room to choose you without guilt or fear. Detachment from outcome doesn't mean detachment from care. It means you're no longer using the relationship to regulate your sense of worth or safety. You enjoy connection as it unfolds, but you don't cling to it. You don't try to define it prematurely or protect it from uncertainty. You allow the relationship to reveal itself over time. This creates a calm, open environment where the avoidant doesn't feel rushed to decide or commit before they feel ready. When you stop securing, you also stop over-functioning. You're no longer filling every emotional gap, initiating every moment of closeness, or carrying the relationship forward on your own. This allows natural reciprocity to emerge. The avoidant begins to feel the space where their effort matters. They notice when they reach out, when they initiate, when they invest. That awareness can awaken desire, because now their actions have impact. You're not doing the emotional work for two. There is also a powerful self-respect shift here. When you're not trying to secure someone, you're paying attention to whether the connection actually works for you. You're not so focused on keeping them that you ignore how you feel. This changes your energy completely. You're no longer trying to be chosen, you're evaluating alignment. That internal shift is often what makes someone suddenly want to choose you, because confidence without attachment is magnetic. Security grows in the absence of fear. When you're calm in uncertainty, you signal emotional maturity. You show that you trust yourself to handle any outcome. An avoidant who is often overwhelmed by emotional responsibility feels relief in your presence. They don't feel like they have to reassure you, manage you, or decide faster than they're ready to. Instead, they get to experience connection at a pace that feels safe. Over time, this environment allows real attachment to form. Not attachment driven by anxiety or control, but attachment rooted in choice. When someone realizes they are with a person who doesn't need to lock them in to feel safe, they begin to feel safe staying. And that's the paradox: the less you try to secure them, the more secure they feel with you, and the more likely they are to choose you fully.